In this video, I will be analyzing my infographic about the Star Wars original trilogy. The purpose of my infographic isn't to introduce people who have no context for the trilogy, but for those who have seen them and would like to see more interesting information on it since it can be hard to follow at first. First, I will go over the visual potential of appearance. Visual potential of appearance is when you use shapes, images, or icons to convey how something looks. I exploited the visual potential of appearance by showing imagery of the Millennium Falcon, which I used as a way of immediately conveying that the infographic was about Star Wars, since it's a familiar image to users. I also used an outline of Han Solo as a way of leading into the relationships diagram, which use icons also as a way to visually show who each person was to the user. Next, I will talk about the visual potential of numbers. The visual potential of numbers is the possible ways you can convey numbers through size, area, distance, and many other encodings. I exploited the visual potential of numbers through how I conveyed planet size through the diameters of the circles by showing the relative size to each other. The visual potential of relationships is the possible encodings of connections or relationships through lines, similar shapes, overlapping area, and more. I exploited visual potential of relationships in my infographic through the use of lines in color. I used solid and dashed different colored lines to convey the different kinds of relationships. For example, family, friends, Padawan and master, and romantic. I also used a color encoding to convey the relationships between characters and if they were on the light side or the dark side of the Force. The visual potential of time is the possible ways for you to show time using space or distance on a page between objects. I exploited this by showing events in sequence. I used space in order vertically to convey time, not encoding the space as time between each event, but more as a separation in order to see the order of events. The visual potential of location is how you can encode location using relative distance or position on a page. I exploited this by creating a map of space from Star Wars and placing the planets on it using small circles. You can see the relative distance that Luke has traveled between planets by seeing where each of them are placed on the map. Next, I'll talk about my color model. My color model only has 4 different colors: blue, gold, white, and black. The colors are a direct harmony because they're mostly at opposite sides of the color wheel from each other. I tried to match my color model by using more gold than blue and white, and having the background be black in my infographic. The tone of my color model is dark, but also bright. There's high contrast, which I think matches the Star Wars theme perfectly in giving it a space-like feel as well as showing a light side, dark side contrast. I also copied the stars onto the background of my infographic because so many people requested it to give it more of a space feel. Although the stars only vaguely match my visual model because they are tiny squares in the background, I think they're valuable to my infographic and give it more depth and add an aesthetic that will draw the viewers in. My typography model uses an abolition typeface for titles and subtitles, and uses Arial for the smaller typed texts. There are some annotations on my typography model, as well as identity labels. The encoding that they use to show what they are labeling or annotating is proximity, which is what you can see that I did with my annotations and subtext in this picture of Yavin 4. My visual language is very simplistic, so nothing in my infographic was too complicated. For imagery, icons, and such, there are mostly outlines with slight detail. There was a lot of use of circles as well as layering. I used layering with the stars in the background and also for my visual for location, and circles in every visual I had on my infographic. For lines, I was limited because the only direct use of a line was a very thin line for an annotation on my visual language model. So I had to stretch how I thought about creating lines. I saw the squares that were windows on the buildings. I decided to use those as a way of making a line. I also used the enclosing circle around other circles to make solid lines. I also copied the opaque angles from buildings in the background as a way of making arrows for my location visual. Visual hierarchy is a tool you can use to make sure you're drawing the viewer's attention to what you want them to. This can be done through size, color, contrast, and many other encodings. I use visual hierarchy mainly through size and color. The first Star Wars title is the largest text on the infographic, and also creates a good contrast on the dark background. It would be most likely the first text that viewers see. For visuals, people's eyes would be drawn most to the location and relationship visuals because they're so large. This works well because I would want the viewer to go through my visuals looking at the location, size, then timeline in that order, and then see the relationship. Because the size, location, and timeline are very interconnected. Unity and variety is when you use similarities between things to unify them, and also variety to keep everything differentiated and more interesting. The similarities in my infographic are the use of circles throughout and using the same colored titles for each section. The titles also have some variation. For example, the main title is the largest, and every other title for each section I alternate font size. For my layout model, I followed the general size of each section and also tried to mimic some of the alignment. For example, the title has a visual that precedes it, just like the layout model does. Also, for the last section, I divided it in two, like the layout model does, but the purpose of my split sections is different. I put Han Solo to the left side of my visual so that users would see the imagery of a character and connect more, and then see the relationships visuals. I also tried to mimic the center alignment of everything in my layout model. Here's my infographic next to all my models. I matched the layout, color, and typography models well. The only model that isn't followed perfectly is my visual model because of my use for square stars in the background. But I would argue, once again, that it plays a valuable part in my infographic. Like I said before, it gives my infographic a layered depth. I think it also adds to the viewer experience and engagement. Because although the purpose of my infographic is to effectively show information, it is also for the viewers to connect with and enjoy the infographic.